there, let's overthink about overthinking, shall we? Seriously, I know overthinking is bad. Of course it is. It has the word over in it. We know everything with the word over in it is bad for you. But I'm an overachiever and a little bit of a perfectionist, and those things, kind of overthinking and overachievement, tend to go hand in hand. I notice with myself and my clients that a lot of us have those things in common. And it makes some sense. I mean, I can see how those two things are related because we tend to think, sure, I'm miserable with overthinking, but look how far it's gotten me. And it's true. I mean, in some ways it makes sense because you don't get to be successful in life by winging it. Very few people can be successful without a lot of thought and care and strategizing. But at the same time, we all know that line is pretty easy to cross. And you can go from helpful thought to overthinking pretty easily, especially if you're a person who has a hard time quieting your mind before you go to bed or when you're sitting in traffic and when you're just being still. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day and we're just chit-chatting and she was asking me, oh, how are you been? And I said to her, well, I mean, overall I've been really good. I haven't been sleeping well though because I'm just so worried about my daughter. I mean, she will be going off to college and it can be so dangerous for young ladies out there in this world and it just ruins my sleep. I cannot stop thinking about it. Y'all, she's 9. Like, let's get her through the 4th grade and then we can turn the full might of our attention to campus security issues. That's a perfect example of overthinking. Like, we're way over the line into overthinkingville. So the question then becomes, how do we stop that overthinking train in its tracks? What are the practical tools we can use? Before we jump into that, I want to quickly remind you that I post every single week about health and wellness and mindset and success. And if those topics interest you as much as they interest me, I definitely suggest that you hit the red subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss those. So, a 3-step process to stop overthinking in its tracks. The first step is to share. Get what is in your mind out of your mind. Just telling it to someone else can be so powerful. In fact, this is kind of the power of coaching and therapy, among other things, but one really powerful piece of it is just saying what your thoughts are out loud. A lot of times, the first time somebody hears what's inside their head out loud, they immediately are like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. It just evaporates the power that thought has over you when you articulate it. Alternately, I like to write these things down. Just write down everything, every thought that's going on in my head. This is especially helpful at night. Just write it all out, and then have something handy that you can tell yourself about how you'll deal with this in the morning. I'm really good in the morning. I'm fresh in the morning. This is great. I'm going to get all these things out of my head and then I'll be able to deal with it in the morning. And the reality is when you wake up refreshed and you read over it, a lot of that stuff just doesn't have power over you anymore. You're like, well, that doesn't even make sense. Or it is important and you are in a good state of mind and you're in a place where you can actually take action to do something about it. The second thing is then to look or hear what you've said or look at what you've written and identify cognitive distortions. Cognitive distortions is basically just a really fancy way of saying beliefs that are in your head that there's really not any evidence that they're true. They're mind tricks. There are tons of different cognitive distortions. If you haven't, Google cognitive distortions and read all about it. It's fascinating. It'll probably open your eyes up to a lot of things. But the 2 cognitive distortions that I find are most connected to overthinking are filtering and catastrophizing. Filtering is when you basically just notice everything negative, and humans are kind of built this way. We notice negative things more often than we notice positive things. I read that the reason for that biologically has something to do with that negative things help us stay safe. So it makes sense. This is a natural thing that happens, but you have to take intentional steps to make sure that you're not only noticing the negative. Catastrophizing is what I was doing with that story about my daughter. I was just thinking about things that may or may not happen, may or may not be true, and just assuming the worst is going to happen. You'll notice that you are catastrophizing if you're asking yourself a lot of what if questions. What if this? What if they thought that? What if this happens? If you're doing that, you're probably catastrophizing. And this brings us right to our third step. They flow one right into another. Because once you notice the cognitive distortion, you will have a pre-planned remedy. The reason I stress pre-planned is we don't want to be making game time decisions. If you are trying to get past a cognitive distortion in the moment, it's going to be so much harder to get to it. So pre-plan. I typically do this. My cognitive distortions are typically this. So every time that happens, I will do this. For filtering, one thing that you can do to remedy that is make yourself write down 3 positive things. So you read over what what you wrote, you notice that you're doing a lot of pointing out all the negatives of the situation. So you say to yourself, okay, what are the 3 positive things that happened? That helps a lot to give you peace in that moment, but it also has a secondary benefit, which I love, which is once you start to train your brain that you're going to have to do this exercise of finding the positive, it will start to look for positives. For instance, let's say you're giving a presentation at work, and typically after presentation days, you lay in bed at night and think, I noticed that this person gave me a weird look and this part didn't go as well, and you're pointing out all the negatives. You write that down and you think, I'm filtering. What are the positive things? What happens is the next time you go to do something at work or you're filtering, in that moment, your brain is going to be like, I need to find the positives. That person smiled at me. That person's nodding and seems to really appreciate it. When the person comes to you and says, you did a great job, you actually hear that like, good, that's one of my positives. I'm feeling confident in this section. There's one of my positives. You start to notice the positives, which takes away the power of the filtering and takes away the overthinking later. If you know that you tend to catastrophize, you can just keep a few questions handy, and you can even just write these down and have them available to you. And the first one of those is this true? It's a very simple question, but an important one to ask. Is this true? Let's take the example of my daughter. Yes, it's true. Young ladies do tend to have dangers on campuses and do need to be careful. So that's true. My brain isn't saying something that is totally out of the blue. So you can go to the second question then. If it is true, you go to the second question, and that question is, do I need to deal with it right now? Typically, you'll find that very few things have to be dealt with right here in this moment. If it is something that needs to be dealt with right now, great. You're capable of that. You can deal with it right this moment. But typically, when you're overthinking, it's not something that needs to be dealt with right now. That's kind of the whole thing of catastrophizing, is you're taking something and making it way bigger than it is, or bringing it into the present when it's really far down in the future and may or may not even happen. The third question that is a really powerful one is, what else could be true? This one is really awesome whenever you find yourself making assumptions and trying to be a mind reader, trying to assume and tell yourself a story about what other people are doing and how they think so negatively of you or something like that. What else could be true? And just list all of them. This could also be true. This could also be true. This could also be true. I mean, there's so many things you don't know. And that's the point. You're just showing yourself like, I don't actually know what's true, but here's all these other things that could also be true that aren't negative. And that kind of stops that overthinking in its tracks. A quick bonus point, if all of that fails, have a distraction handy. I love Disney. If I ever am in a place where my mind is just taking away, it's just gone, I know that I can stop for a second and just mentally walk down Main Street USA, enjoy the sights and sounds. I just truly envision everything about it. Have a happy place, a place in your mind that you know brings you joy, that you can just kind of walk around or think about or revisit a happy memory. And you can always have that handy as a distraction. If this video helped you, I hope you'll give it a big thumbs up. If you want to keep learning, click right here. If you want to subscribe before you go, click right here. I appreciate you so much. And until the next one, be well.